I was at a 3-day law enforcement conference in the neighboring state when I got the call that would change everything. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, and she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Mike, they're tearing it down. Your grandfather's house. They've got bulldozers and they're destroying everything." My blood ran cold. I stood up in the middle of the presentation and rushed out of the conference hall, my phone pressed to my ear. "Who's tearing it down? What are you talking about?" "The HOA. That awful woman with the clipboard. She showed up with demolition trucks this morning. She had some papers she said were permits. I tried to call you for hours." I jumped into my squad car and flipped on the lights and siren. The 3-hour drive back to my hometown felt like the longest of my life. My name is Michael Collins and I'm the sheriff of Pine County. But at that moment I wasn't thinking like a law enforcement officer. I was thinking about my grandfather, Captain James Collins, who had built that house with his own hands after fighting the Nazis across Europe in World War II. That house was more than just a building. It was a piece of history, a monument to a hero, and the last physical connection I had to my grandfather. And someone was destroying it while I was away. As I sped down the highway, I called Deputy Johnson, who was covering for me during my absence. "Thomas, I need you at my grandfather's property immediately. Someone's demolishing the house without permission." "On it, Sheriff," he replied, sounding confused but professional. "But I thought you should know, I got a call about that earlier today. Marge Winters from the Silver Springs HOA had county permits. I checked them myself. They looked legitimate. Marge Winters. I should have known. For the past 5 years, she'd been the president of the Silver Springs Homeowners Association, the fancy new development that had sprung up about half a mile from my grandfather's property. She'd been trying to get my grandfather to sell the property for years, claiming it didn't fit with the neighborhood aesthetic and was bringing down property values. But there was one massive problem with her claim. My grandfather's house wasn't part of her HOA. It never had been. His property predated the development by over 70 years. She had absolutely no authority over it. "Did you see the actual demolition permits?" I asked Deputy Johnson. "Yes, sir. They had the county seal and everything. Signed by Commissioner Davis." That didn't make sense. Commissioner Davis was on vacation in Florida. I'd spoken to him just yesterday about a budget matter. When I finally arrived at what used to be my grandfather's property 3 hours later, I felt physically ill. The beautiful 2-story home with its hand-carved porch railings and custom stonework was gone. In its place was nothing but a pile of rubble and dirt. Even the massive oak trees my grandfather had planted as saplings in 1947 had been cut down. Deputy Johnson was standing by his patrol car, looking deeply uncomfortable. Mrs. Jenkins was there too, still in tears. And then I saw her, Marge Winters, clipboard in hand, supervising as workers loaded the last of the debris into dumpsters. She was a tall woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing an expensive pantsuit despite the dusty conditions. I parked my squad car and stepped out, still in my full sheriff's uniform from the conference. Marge didn't immediately notice me as I approached, too busy dictating something to a man in a hard hat. "And make sure all of it is cleared by tonight. The construction team for the community center starts tomorrow, and I want a clean slate." "Excuse me," I said, my voice surprisingly calm given the rage building inside me. "What exactly is going on here?" Marge turned, annoyed at the interruption. She glanced at my uniform but didn't seem to register who I was. "This is a closed demolition site, officer. If you need information you can contact Silver Springs HOA during business hours." "I'm not just any officer, Ms. Winters. I'm Sheriff Michael Collins. This was my grandfather's property, and I want to know who authorized its destruction." For a moment, just a brief moment, I saw panic flash across her face. Then her practiced composure returned. "Sheriff Collins, I understand this might be upsetting, but everything was done properly. This structure was condemned by county authorities last month as unsafe and a fire hazard. We have all the necessary permits for the demolition." She handed me her clipboard with what appeared to be official county documents, complete with seals and signatures. I looked them over carefully. At first glance they seemed legitimate. But after 15 years in law enforcement, I knew what authentic county documents looked like. These had inconsistencies, the wrong font and places, slightly misaligned seals, and most damningly, Commissioner Davis's signature dated from 3 days ago, when he was definitely in Florida. "These permits are forgeries," I stated flatly. Marge's smile faltered. "That's a serious accusation, Sheriff. These were processed through proper channels." "Really? Then you won't mind if I call Commissioner Davis right now to verify?" The same Commissioner Davis who supposedly signed this 3 days ago, despite being in Key West for the past 2 weeks. The construction foreman, who had been listening nearby, suddenly looked concerned. Ms. Winters, you assured us all the paperwork was legitimate. If there's a problem with the permits. There's no problem, Marge snapped. Sheriff Collins is obviously emotional because of his personal connection to this eyesore. The county approved everything. I pulled out my phone and called the county clerk's office, putting it on speaker. Sally, this is Sheriff Collins. I need you to check if any demolition permits were issued for 1572 Oakwood Drive in the past month. After a few moments of typing, Sally responded, No, Sheriff, nothing for that address. The last permit issued for that property was a roofing repair permit to Captain James Collins back in 2015. The color drained from Marge's face. Thank you, Sally, I said, ending the call. I turned to Deputy Johnson. Thomas, I need you to secure this site as a crime scene. No one leaves until we get statements from everyone involved. Yes, Sheriff, he replied, now understanding the gravity of the situation. Marge tried to maintain her authority. This is ridiculous. Silver Springs has been trying to address this property for years. It was a blight on the community and a safety hazard. This property was a historic home built by a decorated war hero, I corrected her. It was valued at over $1.5 million due to its architectural significance and custom craftsmanship. And more importantly, it was not part of your HOA and never has been. The expansion plans clearly show. Show what? I interrupted. That you wanted this land? That doesn't give you the right to demolish someone else's property. Ms. Winters, I'm placing you under investigative detention while we sort this out. You can't be serious, she sputtered as Deputy Johnson approached with handcuffs. Do you know who my husband is? He plays golf with the mayor. Your husband can explain that to the county prosecutor, I replied. Right now you're looking at charges of criminal destruction of property, forgery of official documents, filing false permits, and theft of property valued over $1 million. As Deputy Johnson read Marge her rights, I walked through what remained of my grandfather's home. Among the splinters of wood and crushed stone, I spotted something metallic. I carefully picked it up. It was my grandfather's Purple Heart medal, now bent and covered in dust. Next to it lay shattered pieces of the display case that had contained his Silver Star, Bronze Star, and other World War II decorations. 70 years of history, destroyed in a single morning by someone who thought rules didn't apply to her. I pocketed the damaged medal and turned back to where Marge was now sitting in the back of Deputy Johnson's patrol car. This wasn't just about enforcing the law anymore. This was personal. The next morning, I sat in my office reviewing the evidence we'd gathered. The scale of Marge Winters' deception was staggering. The forged demolition permits were just the beginning. We'd obtained a search warrant for the HOA offices and found detailed plans for a community center, to be built on my grandfather's property, plans dated 6 months earlier. We also found emails between Marge and her husband, Richard Winters, discussing how to deal with the Collins property problem. One particularly damning message read, If the old man's grandson is out of town for that conference next week, we can finally take care of it. No one will stop the bulldozers once they start. They had been watching my schedule, waiting for an opportunity when I wouldn't be around to stop them. Deputy Martinez knocked on my door. Sheriff, the county prosecutor is here. District Attorney Sarah Chen entered my office with a sympathetic expression. She'd known my grandfather too. Everyone in Pine County had. Captain Collins was a local legend, not just for his war heroism but for the decades he'd spent volunteering with veterans and teaching local history to schoolchildren. Mike, I'm so sorry about your grandfather's house, she said. I've reviewed the evidence your deputies gathered. This is one of the most blatant cases of property fraud I've ever seen. What charges are we looking at? I asked, trying to focus on the legal aspects rather than my personal grief. Destruction of property, forgery, fraud, filing false documents with government agencies, and criminal conspiracy at minimum, Sarah listed. Given the value of the destroyed property and the premeditated nature of the crime, we're talking about potential sentences of 15 to 20 years. I nodded. What about Richard Winters? The emails show he was involved in planning this. We're preparing charges against him too, Sarah confirmed. And I've asked the state attorney general to look into their other developments. If they did this once, they've probably done it before, I finished. I spent the rest of the day interviewing Silver Springs HOA board members. Most claimed they knew nothing about the demolition plans, insisting Marge had told them my grandfather's property had been legally purchased by the HOA after his death. She showed us a deed transfer, explained board member Helen Rogers. We had no reason to doubt her. She handles all the legal paperwork. By evening, we had enough evidence to arrest Richard Winters as a co-conspirator. The prominent real estate attorney was shocked when deputies arrived at his office with a warrant. Apparently, he hadn't expected his wife to be caught, or for her to immediately implicate him when faced with serious charges. The local newspaper ran the story on its front page the next day: HOA president and husband arrested for destroying war hero's historic home. The community's reaction was immediate and powerful. People left flowers and American flags at the edge of my grandfather's property. Veterans groups held a vigil. Former neighbors shared stories of Captain Collins with news reporters. But perhaps the most significant development came 3 days after the demolition, when I received a call from the governor's office. "Sheriff Collins," said the governor's chief of staff. "The governor is deeply disturbed by what happened to your grandfather's home. Captain Collins served with the governor's father in Europe. He'd like to discuss a special historical preservation order for the property, and a state grant to rebuild the house according to its original plans." It turned out my grandfather, always meticulous, had filed detailed architectural drawings of his home with the County Historical Society years ago. Rebuilding would be possible, though it would never be the same. The preliminary hearing for Marge and Richard Winters was scheduled for the following week. They hired an expensive defense attorney from the city who immediately tried to characterize the demolition as a tragic misunderstanding and administrative error. Judge Eleanor Washington, who had known my grandfather for decades, was not impressed. "Your clients deliberately forged county documents," she stated during the bond hearing. "They waited until Sheriff Collins was out of town, then destroyed a historic property they had no legal right to touch. This was not a misunderstanding." She set bail at $1 million each, an unusually high amount that reflected the severity of the charges and the community's outrage. As I left the courthouse, Marge's attorney approached me. "Sheriff Collins, my clients would like to discuss a potential resolution," he said smoothly. "They're prepared to fully fund the reconstruction of your grandfather's home and provide substantial additional compensation for the distress caused." "In exchange for what?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "In exchange for dropping the criminal charges, of course. This was a civil matter that got out of hand." I looked at him in disbelief. "Your clients committed multiple felonies, destroyed irreplaceable historical artifacts, and violated my family's legacy. There will be no deals." In the weeks that followed, more evidence emerged about the Winters schemes. They had apparently used similar tactics, though never quite so brazenly, to pressure other homeowners near Silver Springs. They'd issue fake violations, threaten legal action, and eventually force people to sell their properties at below-market rates. The district attorney expanded the charges to include a pattern of racketeering and corruption. Several county employees came forward admitting they'd been paid to expedite permits without proper review, though none had knowingly participated in the forgery scheme. Meanwhile, the community rallied around the effort to rebuild Captain Collins' home. Contractors volunteered labor. Suppliers donated materials. Skilled craftsmen offered to recreate the custom woodwork and stonework that had made the house so special. 4 months after the demolition, Marge and Richard Winters went to trial. They'd fired their expensive attorney and hired another who specialized in plea deals, but the DA wasn't interested in negotiating, not with the evidence we had, and not with the community watching closely. The trial lasted just 5 days. The evidence was overwhelming, the witness testimony damning, and the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Washington spoke directly to the Winters. "In my 30 years on the bench, I've seen many cases of greed and entitlement, but few that matched the arrogance displayed in this case," she said. "You destroyed not just a building but a piece of our community's history, a war hero's legacy, and a family's heritage, all because it didn't fit your aesthetic vision or business plans." She sentenced Marge to 18 years in state prison and Richard to 15 years. Additionally, they were ordered to pay $3 million in restitution, double the value of the destroyed property. As they were led away, Marge finally showed genuine emotion, breaking down in tears. But Richard just looked angry, glaring at me as if this was somehow my fault rather than the consequence of their actions. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered for a statement. I kept it brief. "Justice was served today not just for my family but for everyone who believes that rules and laws apply equally to all people, regardless of their position or influence." My grandfather taught me that principle, and as sheriff, I intend to uphold it. 1 year later, I stood on the porch of the rebuilt Collins family home. It wasn't exactly the same, nothing could replace the home my grandfather had built with his own hands, but the architects and craftsmen had done remarkable work recreating its character and dignity. Inside, a special room now displayed my grandfather's restored medals and military memorabilia, along with photographs and documents about his service. The governor had officially designated the property as a state historical site, protecting it from any future threats. The Silver Springs HOA had been completely restructured after the scandal. The new board, led by Helen Rogers, who had cooperated with our investigation, had implemented transparency requirements and strict limits on HOA authority. They'd even created a community outreach program to repair relationships with neighboring properties. As for Marge and Richard Winters, their appeals had been denied. They would serve their full sentences, their reputation and fortune destroyed by their own arrogance. Mrs. Jenkins joined me on the porch, bringing a plate of cookies like she used to when my grandfather was alive. "He would be proud," she said, looking at the rebuilt home. "Not just of the house, but of how you handled everything." I nodded, thinking about the lesson in all of this. You know what my grandfather used to say about his time in the war? That the biggest danger wasn't just the evil people, but the arrogant ones who thought rules didn't apply to them. "Sounds like he was talking about Marge Winters," Mrs. Jenkins remarked. "In a way," I agreed. "But he also taught me that justice catches up eventually." Mrs. Jenkins smiled. "I bet Marge Winters never imagined she was messing with the county sheriff's family when she sent those bulldozers." "That was her biggest mistake," I said, looking out at the property my grandfather had loved so much. "Not checking who she was dealing with before she destroyed a hero's home." The new American flag on the front pole snapped crisply in the breeze, just like my grandfather had always kept it. Some things change, but principles remain. Marge Winters learned that lesson the hard way when she destroyed a $1.5 million World War II hero's home, not knowing it belonged to the county sheriff's grandfather. And in Pine County, we don't forget. We don't forgive those who disrespect our heroes. And we make sure justice is served, no matter who you are or how important you think you are. That's what my grandfather fought for, and that's what I continue to fight for every day as sheriff. Some battles are fought on foreign soil, and some are fought in courtrooms and communities, but they all matter in protecting what's right.